In the second half of the 20th century, the world was split into two poles. On one side stood the capitalist West, and on the other, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, a massive entity covering 1/6 of the Earth's landmass. Watching the military parades in Red Square in the early 1980s, one would never have believed that this giant would vanish in just a decade. Yet, the massive machine was rusting from within. By the mid-1970s, the economy had entered the era of stagnation. Central planning could no longer meet the basic needs of the people. A superpower capable of sending rockets into space could not provide enough shoes or bread for its citizens. Corruption had seeped into every level of the system, and the bureaucracy was more concerned with protecting its own privileges than serving the public. In 1985, the era of elderly and ailing Kremlin leaders ended, and a 54-year-old Mikhail Gorbachev took the stage. Gorbachev recognized that the system was paralyzed. In an attempt to save socialism, he introduced two radical concepts: perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness. He aimed to modernize the economy, but loosening central control caused production chains to collapse entirely. Scarcity on the shelves worsened. The freedom of speech brought by glasnost acted like a boomerang. People began to speak loudly for the first time about the crimes of the Stalin era, the failure in Afghanistan, and the fundamental flaws of the system. Instead of strengthening the regime, transparency destroyed its legitimacy. The first major nail in the coffin came from Chernobyl in 1986. The nuclear disaster was not just a technical failure. It was proof that the Soviet bureaucracy was built on lies. While Moscow tried to hide the scale of the disaster, radiation reached Europe. This event imposed a massive financial burden and shattered the public's remaining trust in the state. Simultaneously, the quagmire in Afghanistan was eroding the prestige of the military. The intervention that began in 1979 resulted in thousands of young Soviet soldiers returning in coffins. The army realized it was not invincible. Economically, the situation was dire. Global oil prices crashed from $30 to $10 a barrel. For a country whose primary hard currency came from oil, this was a declaration of bankruptcy. By 1989, Eastern Europe was boiling over. Gorbachev announced the Sinatra Doctrine. Unlike his predecessors, he would not send tanks to crush uprisings in satellite states. Everyone could go their own way. The Berlin Wall fell, and communist regimes from Poland to Romania collapsed one after another. This wind of freedom soon blew into the Soviet Union itself. The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, raised the flag of independence. Ethnic conflicts erupted in the Caucasus. The Soviet identity was rapidly being replaced by nationalist identities. Moscow could no longer hold the fringes of the empire together. August 1991 marked the peak of the collapse. Hardliners within the system, generals and KGB chiefs, attempted a coup to stop Gorbachev's new Union Treaty. However, the people stood in front of the tanks. Boris Yeltsin climbed atop an armored vehicle, becoming the symbol of resistance. The coup failed, but Gorbachev was now a leader only on paper. Real power had shifted to Yeltsin. On December 8, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met secretly in a hunting lodge to declare that the Soviet Union had officially ceased to exist. There was no longer a budget, an army, or a central authority. December 25, 1991, at 7:32 p.m., the hammer and sickle red flag atop the Kremlin was lowered for the last time after 7 decades. In its place, the tricolor flag of the Russian Federation was raised for the first time since the Tsarist era. The fall of the Soviet Union was not the end of history, as some Western thinkers predicted, but rather the beginning of a chaotic and painful transition. Overnight, 287 million people woke up in a world where the rules of survival had changed. The ruble lost its value, and the guaranteed employment of the socialist state evaporated, replaced by the harsh, unregulated, Wild West capitalism of the 1990s. While a handful of well-connected individuals, the future oligarchs, seized the vast mineral and industrial wealth of the former empire, the average citizen faced extreme poverty. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, former scientists and professors were seen selling their household belongings on street corners just to buy bread. This economic trauma would leave a deep scar on the collective psyche of the region. Geopolitically, the collapse left behind a series of frozen conflicts. The borders drawn by Soviet cartographers decades earlier suddenly became international frontiers, often cutting through ethnic heartlands. From Transnistria in Moldova to Nagorno-Karabakh in the Caucasus, and later to the Donbass in Ukraine, the ghosts of the Soviet collapse continued to haunt the 21st century. The massive Soviet nuclear arsenal, once the greatest threat to the West, became a logistical nightmare. Through diplomatic efforts like the Budapest Memorandum, these weapons were consolidated into Russia, but the underlying tensions between the former republics remained. The Iron Curtain had fallen, but in its place, a new, invisible wall of economic disparity and nationalist resentment began to rise. To some, the collapse was a liberation, the end of a prison of nations and the beginning of democratic hope. To others, particularly within the aging population and the later Putin-era leadership, it was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Today, the architecture of the former Soviet Union still stands as a concrete reminder of a vanished utopia. The space stations, the brutalist monuments, and the vast railway networks remain, but the ideology that powered them is gone. The collapse taught the world a vital lesson: that no matter how much military might a state possesses, it cannot survive if it loses its economic viability and the trust of its own people. As we look back at those final days of 1991, we see more than just the end of a country. We see the fragility of human institutions. The Soviet Union was an attempt to re-engineer humanity itself through the lens of a single ideology. Its failure proved that the world is far more complex, diverse, and unpredictable than any central planner could ever imagine. The red flag is gone, but the echoes of its descent still resonate in every headline, every border dispute, and every shift in the global balance of power today. The giant has fallen, but the world is still walking through the dust it left behind.